Hello, everybody. I am so excited for today. I am Maria, and I am the admin of the Money Making Esthetician Facebook group. And today we're joined with Dr. Schwartz. This is such a special treat. Thank you so much, Laura and Danielle, for putting this together. We'll go ahead and start with introductions.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you guys so much for being here this evening. My name is Danielle Hale and I'm an educator and trainer with ProCell Therapies Microchanneling. We also have Laura Lynn on the call and she is also a dedicated trainer and educator with ProCell Therapies. We are both the dedicated reps for the Money Making Esthetician group and we are so excited for this webinar tonight. We have a very special guest. We have the founder and CMO, Chief Medical Officer of ProCell Therapies, Dr. Mitchell Schwartz. Dr. Mitchell Schwartz is a 40-plus year board certified dermatologist, and he founded ProCell Therapies Microchanneling back in 2014. He is here tonight to share all the science behind growth factors, exosomes, and cytokines. You will also learn the difference between microchanneling and microneedling, as I know you guys, this is a topic that comes up all the time. And he will also be explaining different depths and why less is more. We will also be having a live Q&A at the end, but keeping it to a minimum to respect everyone's time. So if you guys have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to pop them in the chat and Laura will answer them as she goes along. We will also reserve some questions for Dr. Schwartz to answer at the end of the presentation. Again, thank you all for being here. And without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Mitchell Schwartz.
Okay, well, thank you, Danielle, for the very nice introduction, and thank you to everyone for taking time from your busy schedule and joining us today. So as Danielle said, there's a lot of different things to cover here, everything from microchanneling versus microneedling. Is there really a difference? To cytokines and growth factors and what works and doesn't work. And exosomes has been a hot topic these days, so we'll talk quite a bit about that. And I even threw in a little bit about how to really listen to someone and try to make sense of what they're saying. Is it science-based? Is it anecdotal? Is it real? Is it not real? It's a big industry and there's a lot of competition out there, and it can get pretty interesting at times for sure. So it can all be very confusing because there's so many new things happening all the time. So that's my plan. And what I want to show you today is that the majority of what I'm saying is not only science-based, but I'll give you the references that justify the things I'm saying, and I've helped support my feelings about how this science is working and what made me start the company and why I think it's so effective. So I'll show you all the proof in various published articles as well, which should be available to anyone if they want to research it further. So to get into it, it is not advancing. So how do I advance the slides? Whoops, there we go. Okay, first the disclosure. I'm the founder and chief medical officer of ProCell Therapies. So whenever you hear something like that, you have to sort of think, well, this could be a biased opinion about things because there's financial interest involved. So I will we'll talk more about that later and show you why everything I'm saying is science-based. My second disclosure, I was born and raised in Philadelphia, so I'm a long-term Eagles fan. Those of you who follow the Philadelphia Eagles and watch the Super Bowl, you may have seen me in the stands. That's my wife, and I think we had the only dog that was present in the Super Bowl as well. And if you hear her bark in the background, she does that if someone comes to the door. So that's our doggie, but pretty phenomenal game if you're an Eagles fan. So what started all this was over 10 years ago when I started the company. Whenever I have a new patient come to the office for a cosmetic consultation, this is a poster that I have in each of my exam rooms. And I would go through this poster with each person just to give them a good education of the entire picture in my mind of what we were trying to achieve. And this is still valid even today, even though this article came out so many years ago. So in fact, this article came out in 2014, so that was over 10 years ago. So the first level is protection and repair, and everyone should be on a sunscreen. So that's really key. Antioxidants are pretty universal now. So everyday people are putting antioxidants on their skin, which is nice in terms of repairing the skin. And DNA repair enzymes is something relatively new these days that you'll be hearing more and more about. We didn't talk too much about it. No one was using those for a while. They've been out for a while commercially. And ProCell has gotten very, very interested in DNA repair enzymes. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, but you'll be hearing a lot more about that in the future. The second level is transformation. So you want to reverse the damage that's occurred. And typically that was the next and only step for years and years. And that was simply putting on tretinoin cream or old-fashioned Retin-A. Alpha-hydroxy acids were good, but not nearly as effective. And it made people peel. So they would just exfoliate and stimulate new skin, new collagen formation. And it made people look good and it gave them a nice glow. And that was the best we had to offer. And I had patients on tretinoin cream for 20 plus years, and they were very happy to continue and never wanted to stop. And one day, I had patients coming into me saying that one of the new creams that I was recommending for them, which we sold in my office, which was made by Neocutis, was really doing amazing things for them. They felt their wrinkles were getting better, the skin looked brighter, and they just really liked the results. And Neocutis, to my knowledge back then, was one of the first companies to come out with one of these new stem cell cytokine growth factor serums. So they were actually using fibroblasts. So when I say stem cell, it was really fibroblasts that they were using at that time. And the fibroblasts were making the growth factors. And it really was working. Their skin, I was admitting, was much better than I've seen the results. And for under eyes and wrinkles, there was never anything that worked. And one patient after another came back and said, this stuff works under my eyes. That's where I'm putting it as well. So I thought, wow, we're really onto something here. This is new and it really does work. So the quick word about DNA repair enzymes, because we're going to be talking a lot more about that in the future with ProCell. These are proteins that have a strong attraction for the DNA of the nucleus. And there's three that are commercially available: photosomes, roxosomes, and ultrasomes. And they come from different sources throughout the world. But blue algae is a common one. And you think about it, it's bombarded by sun all day long. The sunlight damages the DNA within the cells. And creatures have a way of protecting themselves, and therefore the DNA gets repaired from the sun damage because of these enzymes. And that's what's happening here. The DNA is damaged, so-called pyrimidine dimers are formed, and photolase in particular uses energy from visible light to break these dimers and make the DNA normal again. And some great scientific studies showing tagged molecules attached to the DNA and then showing the damaged DNA. And after the treatment with these repair enzymes, they show the DNA is normal again, which is pretty impressive. It does help to prevent skin cancer in people, and it does make your skin look better from all the changes from sun damage. So there's two great benefits from this: looking better and prevention of skin cancer. So I think it's a great product, and we're going to be using that in our serums in the future. So what are cytokines and growth factors? That's the way the cells talk to each other. It's a cellular communication. 200 different types of cells in the human body. And other than red blood cells, that's how they all talk to one another. And we lump all these signals into so-called cytokines and growth factors. So what are they? They're hormones. They're signaling molecules. They influence behavior of other cells. There's so many of them now and more being discovered all the time that they had to categorize them. So they either pick categories where they look the same or categories where they have the same type of effect when they trigger something to happen in another cell. They can happen at close distances where they can travel much further away, but typically they trigger behaviors in cells that are right nearby, and it doesn't take much. It's a very low concentration. So they're pretty sensitive things to know about and to utilize. So looking at the families that are set up now, there's quite a few, lots of different names. And again, it's all based on how they look or what type of functions they serve. We'll talk more about some of these. TGF-beta-3 is an important one for wound healing. So that's one of the important ones that we like to talk about being in our serum. The very bottom right is the WNT family, and that's the pathway for hair regrowth. And that's one of the key players in stimulating new growth of hair. So you'll hear a lot about that in the news and the literature, and a little bit about that as well today with our serums. So 3 types of hormone signals: endocrine, and that's where the signal gets into the bloodstream, travels elsewhere in the body, and delivers this message to a cell much further away. Autocrine is kind of weird, but it's the cell putting out in the extracellular space a message, which turns around and comes back into the cell and then triggers the cell to do something. So that kind of seems a little bit redundant to me, but it's been a known phenomenon. Paracrine is pretty much what we talk about because that's the signal that goes out to nearby cells. So all the growth factors and cytokines that we are using are currently in that paracrine category, which is an important understanding. So let's kind of look at an overview of lots of different cytokines and growth factors that are part of the wound healing process. And they're listed really just the colors to help understand all this. The red is because they're inflammatory cytokines, and they help wound healing by creating inflammation. So there's acute, there's chronic, there's the anti-inflammatory cytokines, that's yellow. And it's important just to follow the colors here because anti-inflammatory cytokines come in the latter stages of wound healing and help the collagen switch from type 1 to type 3 collagen, which is the non-scarring type of collagen. And that's the important part where you get really good wound healing without scarring. So we're going to talk more about these different colors of cytokines as we get into it. So what are the different kinds of cytokines and growth factors out there? There's autologous, there's allogenic, and there's bioengineered. So think of 3 different types of growth factors. Autologous means it comes from the same individual. And classically, that's the PRP facial that you'll hear about. The patient's blood is drawn, it's spinned down. The platelet-rich plasma is taken off the top, it's smeared back on their face. And all these growth factors from the same patient are put back on the skin. And that's pretty much the only treatment that you really hear of that. I've heard of autologous treatments where stem cells are taken from individuals and cytokines and growth factors are extracted from them in the lab. It's very expensive, so only specialty labs are doing that, and it's not out there for real great commercial use because of the cost. Allogenic means it comes from individuals of the same species, and that's the majority of what you'll hear about these days and hear about today. The problem is there's no consistency in the growth factor. Basically, these cells are grown in broths that then secrete their growth factors, and then the broth is treated, usually radiation, so it kills any living tissue, and it's filtered, so there's nothing in there other than growth factors and cytokines. But there's a whole smorgasbord of all different kinds of stuff that's in there, so you don't have control over that. We just have to pick the right cells to create the broth, knowing that it'll have the right things in there that are important for wound healing. And that's pretty much been the state of the art up until now of what we had available. Exosomes are in that category as well, as we'll talk about. Bioengineered, this is something entirely new. And this is using the gene splicing technology, the CRISPR technology. There's a lot of amazing things that are happening now with that, and we'll discuss that as well. But bioengineered is taking genetic material from a different organism and modifying it, and then having that organism produce mass quantities of whatever it is you want them to produce. Vaccines are being made that way, and we can teach cells to make certain growth factors and cytokines, specifically the ones that we want, and have them produce it in mass quantity. So we're not using human-derived tissue, which can be a huge advantage. So these are the 3 big categories to keep in mind as we go through this. So first, a commercially available source is platelet-rich plasma. And as I was saying, that's really the only thing in that category that's autologous. And you have to do the spinning down of the patient's blood. There's lots of extra steps involved. The problem with PRP is that it's extremely inflammatory because when you think of what the purpose is of the healing process, they're the first responders. The platelets are right there at the site of the injury. They create a lot of inflammation, which increases blood flow and brings in all the other cells to help with the healing process. And if you look at the profile of PRP, you'll see that there's a much higher amount of inflammatory cytokines than anti-inflammatory. So that's great for wound healing, but that's not what we're really about. We're more sophisticated now. We want to do more than heal wounds. We're not really into inducing wounds. So as we'll talk about with microneedling, there's more than just creating a wound to this whole secret. So inflammation is not a good thing with what we're trying to accomplish. And I think we all know all the stories we're hearing now, inflammation is pro-aging. So inflammation, if you can avoid it, is not a good thing. If you can avoid it, it's a good thing, I should say, sorry. So next category is fibroblasts. Well, that's where this whole thing started back in the day when Neocutis was using fibroblasts, but they're not really the ideal cells because they're kind of not, they're not the generals, the ones that run the show. They're more like the privates that go out there and do the battle. So they sort of get told what to do and they start making collagen, but they're not the ones that orchestrate the whole process. So the idea is great. It does create collagen. It helps things heal and look good, but there's better ways of doing that we're discovering now. The next category is parthenogenetic stem cells, and I don't hear too much about that anymore because that's taking a human egg and not fertilizing it, but somehow in the lab they get it to create these growth factors. And there's some ethics involved, and people were not too warm and fuzzy about using that. So I hear very little about that these days. So talking about stem cells in general, stem cells are factories that produce cytokines and growth factors. So they're the ideal source for what we're looking for. They're cultured in the lab. They live within this broth that becomes rich in cytokines and growth factors. And then the broth, as I said, is filtered. The key here is the stem cells. Each stem cell is individual, and each stem cell is programmed to make certain growth factors and cytokines. So what stem cells you're using is really the key to what you're going to be getting in that broth, and then the key to what you're going to be doing for your treatment. So it's super important when you're evaluating different serums to know more than just, okay, it's from stem cells. Well, which stem cells are they? Why are you choosing those stem cells? Why are they preferable over all the other different types of stem cells out there? Are they really advantageous? How do we know? So adipose stem cells are the most common ones that you'll see out there. As I'll show you, adipose tissue is fairly inflammatory. And when you look at the cytokine profile of these stem cells, it has an inflammatory profile as well. Why is it so popular? I think mostly because it's readily available. There's so much adipose tissue that's thrown away through liposuction that it's easy for labs to acquire it for almost no cost. So I think that it really helps keep costs down. Some of the sources can get quite expensive, and this is fairly inexpensive. So I think that's a big reason why a lot of people are promoting the use of adipose stem cells. Here's a cytokine profile, and you can see how inflammatory it is. And that's consistent with what we know about the inflammatory effect from fat, especially visceral fat on the body. So that's a concern, and that's why I personally never got involved with adipose stem cells with our serums, because I didn't think it was ideal, as you will see. Next are bone marrow mesenchymal stem cells, and those are the ones that we do use for our serums because I felt that they were the best product in the world at the time when we got started with the company. Mesenchymal refers to the embryonic origin of the cell. It arises from the three primary layers of form during early stages of embryonic development. Mesenchymal stem cells can turn into all different types of cells. It's amazing how talented they are and what they do. When you have an injury and the platelets come in there and release cytokines to increase blood supply, it sends messages to the bone marrow, which then sends mesenchymal stem cells to the site of the injury, and they take over as the orchestra leaders. They're the conductors. They tell everybody what to do to start healing the skin at that point. So they're key cells in this whole tissue repair. So in the symphony of tissue regeneration, bone marrow stem cells are the conductors, which is important to keep in mind. Looking at that cytokine profile, you can see the difference. They're much higher in anti-inflammatory cytokines and growth factors than inflammatory. But remember, when stem cells do their job, they produce numbers and numbers of growth factors and cytokines, not just certain types. So there's all kinds all over the place. A lot of them don't have any activity. They're just there because they produce it. The ones that are important are doing the job and creating new collagen and healing the wound. But in this case, it creates a much more anti-inflammatory environment, which can be important for wound healing, as we'll talk about. So 10 years ago, I met with a company that was just coming out then and using mesenchymal stem cells to make these growth factors and cytokine serums. And Dr. Lance Setterfield wrote this book called The Concise Guide to Dermal Needling, which I highly recommend if you haven't read this, because I think it's a wonderful book. It's probably the best book out there about microneedling in general. And Lance, I met back 10 years ago and we became friends. And he and I met with the two owners of this new company. And we sat down at a table and we talked about the best way they can make a serum that we felt would be safe to use for microneedling into the skin, because I wanted something that was so pure that there wouldn't be a chance there could be allergic reactions or some type of side effect that would be unexpected, because we're practically injecting it into the skin if we're going to be doing microneedling with it. So I wanted something as safe as possible. And the four of us worked out a formula where they could use their growth factors in a way and put in almost no preservatives, but just enough to keep things with a decent shelf life, that I felt comfortable to use it in this company that I was just starting with microneedling. So they began making that for me and for Lance as well. So a lot of talk about anti-inflammatory effect of these cytokines from mesenchymal bone marrow stem cells. So just to give you an example, and this is anecdotal, but it's important to kind of understand this concept. Acne is inflammatory. These cytokines and growth factors are not anti-acne treatment. This patient had microneedling treatments with our human growth factor serum. 3 months later, incredible improvement in the inflammation caused by the acne. So this is just to show you that that's how it worked for her. It's not an acne treatment. It just got rid of the inflammation. Our serums are so anti-inflammatory. We see this with rosacea. We see this with many skin conditions now, that we just will decrease the inflammation and things get much better as a side effect, actually. Patient with hyperpigmentation, 2 ProCell therapy microchanneling treatments using very small needles. And again, this is not a treatment for hyperpigmentation specifically. There's no treatment, there's no medications in there to stop the pigment making cells. This is simply just making the skin look nice, but because of the anti-inflammatory effect, the pigmentation is going away. And if you understand the basis behind hyperpigmentation, there's a layer of inflammation just below the surface driving this reaction. And if you can have an anti-inflammatory effect and get rid of the inflammation, the pigmentation will fade. And that's the reason why this went away. So again, we're looking at an anti-inflammatory effect from our serum. So let's talk about exosomes, because that's such a hot topic these days, and so many things on the market now are coming out with exosomes and claiming to be the latest and the greatest. And let me say that back, I don't know how many years ago, 8 years or so, people approached me about exosomes. It was something new coming out and saying, this is great, you should consider using this and switch from what you're doing. And I looked at it pretty extensively, and I never got comfortable using exosomes. And I'll explain to you why and how I interpret the literature that's out there to still make that decision today. So what are exosomes? Extracellular vesicles secreted by living cells and internalized by other cells. They're packets of information. When they're in the cell, they're endosomes. When they're kicked out into the extracellular space, they're exosomes. What's inside of them? A lot of messengers. There's DNA, there's messenger RNA, there's microRNA, there's cytokines, and there's cytoplasmic proteins. There's a lot of stuff in there, and they travel for large distances, not just locally to nearby cells, but all around the body. Why do they work? Why do they have such good results? Because they have cytokines in there. And the cytokines and growth factors we know do great things, and we've proven that. So are they better than the stem cell cytokines and growth factors? I don't see why they would be, because we know what the good ones are, and we have those in our serums. That's why these work, because they have the right things in there as well. But what about the other stuff? What about the DNA, the messenger RNA, microRNA? How safe is that? That's a concern. That's a big concern that I had from the beginning, having DNA from someone else being placed inside my body and not being comfortable with that. The other problem I had with this years ago was the company that was the first to come out to provide this commercially said it had to be stored at minus 80 degrees centigrade to keep it intact. So, well, how do you do that? Well, you can't have it in your warehouse. We have it in our warehouse. We send it to your customers when they want to order. You just put the order in, we send it to them. It's transported at minus 80 degrees centigrade, and they have to keep it in their freezer at their office until they use it. I said, well, that's going to make it difficult. Exosomes don't quite sound like the future to me. But how much does it cost? Well, it was like per treatment, it was about $800 or more. clients would have to charge over $1,000 per treatment. So another reason I said, I'm not so sure this is going to really take off, because people aren't going to charge that unless they're in Los Angeles and they have only celebrities. So, so let's take a look at exosomes and see if this really makes sense now. If you go to the NIH National Cancer Institute website and type in exosome and do a Google search, this is what you'll find right now. I just did this recently. Exosomes get released into the blood by many types of cells, including cancer cells, travel through the body, cross the blood-brain barrier. Exosomes can transfer DNA, RNA into other cells. Exosomes may play a role in the spread of cancer and may also keep immune cells from killing cancer cells. Well, that didn't make me feel too easy about, wanting to use exosomes in my practice. This is an article that came out 2021 called The Darker Side of Exosomes. They can change the phenotype of target cells. So a cell from birth is told, this is what you do. That's its phenotype. And if all of a sudden it's doing something differently that it's not supposed to do, it's been changed. It's because the DNA has been altered. So that to me is a concern. The orchestra leader points to the violins, and instead of playing a violin, they play the tuba. And like, what's going on? Things are no longer in control, and that bothers me. A lot of other things were concerning too, talking about diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. They can be secreted by cancer cells and express tumor antigens, and maybe that's how cancers can metastasize. So you have to know where your exosomes are coming from. What controls do we have out there of these companies that are making exosome serums? Right now, there are none. There are no regulatory agencies that are monitoring how they're being made. So you have to be careful. This article came out 2023. A physician who's director of pain therapy at Duke said exosomes have long half-lives, can penetrate cell membranes, cross blood-brain barrier. Creation is essential because the therapeutic effects is dependent on donor cells. They can be disease-altering or promoting. And then he concluded they're not approved by the FDA to treat or diagnose any disease, or use should be limited to clinical studies. So, it's getting a little bit antsy now. Why is everybody using exosomes? Why is it such a big thing? Well, there's huge hype out there saying this is the latest, greatest thing. There's a lot of money involved. And what's the science behind this? They're promoting the hype and people buying into the hype. They work because they have cytokines and growth factors, which we know work, but are they really better? Well, this is a screenshot that I took this weekend of a big company that, one of the biggest, that makes exosome serums that's sold in the US. And it's a big moneymaker, a big profit. So if you look at this, you'll see in the middle there, it says the concentrated power of stem cell derived lyophilized exosomes. So what does that mean, lyophilized? It means desiccated. They don't have to be stored at -80 degrees. This is the big breakthrough that enabled this to become commercially available. It's in a powdered form. It's reconstituted and you use it. Forget the -80 degrees. So that's what made this technology take off. And that's why it's so big right now. Okay, sounds pretty cool, except I'm going to show you a study that came out just recently. And I just found out about this study actually this past weekend. Impact of lyophilization on exosome membrane integrity and function, a comparison with saline storage. This was presented at the 9th International Congress of Medical Excellence. And this is a doctor at Harvard Medical School and Boston University that used transmission electron microscopy. It was a blinded study, which is important. Blinded means no one knows what's in the bottle. So they're not biased. They basically looked at saline preserved exosomes stored at, that should be -80 degrees centigrade. And they looked at the lyophilization process, and they used 2 different samples from companies that provide this to be made into serums. And what they showed was that the lyophilization process destroys the exosomes. There were no functioning exosomes, no intact exosomes in the samples that they tested from both companies. And in stark contrast, the ones that were preserved in saline at -80 degrees had their characteristic structure. Again, it was blinded, so they didn't know the results until they showed them at the end. So what's in the serums that make these exosomes serums work? Not exosomes, it's the other ingredients that are in there. So if you're interested in using exosomes, you better talk to the company. You better ask them about that study and say, what's in there that really works and what am I paying for? Because they're charging incredible amounts of money for these serums. Last category is bioengineered, which is what I think the future holds for what we're doing, which is why all this is so key. Bioengineers made in a laboratory. DNA coding is used. They're using E. coli or yeast cells. They grow them in a fermentation chamber, and they're taught to make whatever it is we want them to make. So we'll say, okay, this is a growth factor that we want large quantities of, and splice in the gene, and then this organism just simply cranks away and makes a broth that's just full of this particular growth factor or cytokine that we want. And that's it. So there's no human tissue. This is simply E. coli or yeast. E. coli is a bacteria or yeast that are grown in the laboratory like that. Then they remove any living organisms, filter it, and make sure it's pure. So then we know exactly what's in there. There's only one ingredient in that broth and nothing else. So if you look at our hair growth factor serums, there's 12 of these different growth factors that are bioengineered, and it's pure. There's nothing else in there. How effective is this? Well, I did split face studies in my office where I had my estheticians not know what they were doing, not know which they were using, I should say. Of course, they know what they're doing. And they treated half the face with our new bioengineered serum and half the face with our previous serum that's not bioengineered. And the patient didn't know which half was which. And my estheticians didn't know. And they went through a series of 3 monthly treatments and had photographs before and after. And we did it at 3 locations, my office and a dermatologist I know in Vancouver, Canada, and a spa in Tampa, Florida. And in all 3 cases, everyone agreed that the new serum side was a better result. And they liked the consistency. They just liked the way it felt. So everybody preferred to use the new stuff. So, so we tested it just to really be comfortable that it works. Recently, one of our reps gave me some pictures. She told me she's getting amazing results with the hair serum. So I said, send me some shots. So this was last year, 2024, just a couple before and afters that she just recently sent me to show how all our hair serums work. So 3 different cases, 6 treatments and 7 treatments. So just an example that, these serums really do work. So let's define microneedling and microchanneling. Microneedling is a process that stimulates the collagen production by using needles to pierce the skin. Microchanneling creates microchannels with minimal tissue trauma and helps to optimally allow penetration of topically applied products. So microneedling creates the injury to the skin, tells the skin it's injured. The keratinocytes start creating cytokines and growth factors, and the whole healing cascade takes place. Roller needles enter the skin and exit at severe angles, leaving drag marks. And you can think about the whole geometry of that, how that works. And it does create a lot of tissue trauma, so we don't like derma rollers for that purpose. Pens do the same thing in the sense that you have to do a dragging technique because of the treatment times involved. Dragging technique causes a catch-scratch pattern to the skin. And in the shows that I was doing, we would use an apple and have people put dye on the skin and use all the different modalities, and we wipe the dye off, not on the skin of the apple. And you can see that scratch pattern that forms. And I'll show you a picture of that. Our device has a larger tip. We do a tapping technique. The needles enter the skin vertically and cause very little tissue trauma, which is key, as I will show you. So this is a clay model showing the stamping technique, the narrow channels we create, the scratch effect of pens, and then the wider opening created by the rollers. And if you do that yourself with an apple and some dye, it's really interesting. You can very readily demonstrate that. So what's needle tip size is best, keeping that in mind? Well, we make 4 different size needle tips to pick from. Which one do I recommend that you use? Case study done 2024, monotherapy. This was just doing a needling procedure for androgenetic alopecia. They compared 3 different needle depths. Each patient had 6 sessions, 3 months apart, 2 weeks apart over 3 months. Microneedling alone stimulated hair growth after 3 months. Just needling alone, no medications. They found that the 0.5 millimeter depth had the highest hair regrowth scores compared with other depths. So this is 0.5, 1.0, 1.5, and the 0.5, the smallest needle, worked the best. I was impressed with that results. The hair follicles are really deep. How does that reach down there? Because it stimulates the growth factors to travel down to the hair follicle. I underlined 6 sessions, 3 months, over 3 months, 2 weeks apart, because when you're recommending a treatment session to people, I think that's the best session to do, to recommend, best package to recommend, I should say. I suggest saying to people, yes, you should sign up for a 6-session package. We'll give you a micro needling, microchanneling treatment every 2 weeks over 3 months. And I recommend using 0.5 millimeter needles for that purpose. And if you're in a state where you can only use 0.25, then I'll show you why that's still advantageous over the longer needle tips. But interesting, monotherapy just for treatment of hair loss. That, by the way, was in the study, the American Society for Derm Surgery, 2024. That's one of our biggest journals. So that's a huge journal to have this study published in. Skin on the scalp is typically 4 to 5 millimeters thick. So how does a 0.5 millimeter needle do anything? It's way up high in the epidermis. Epidermis is 1.5 millimeters thick. So you can imagine it's incredibly superficial. So something's going on the surface of the skin. The hair growth cycle, basically as the hair stops growing, it goes into a resting phase. And then when the hair is triggered to start regrowing, that's where the WNT beta-catenin pathway takes over. And that's an important cytokine to stimulate new hair regrowth. So how does microchanneling kick in with all this? Well, enhanced delivery of topically applied formulations pre-treating the skin. This is many years ago. This study was done in 2011. And this is a little device that you just press on the skin with tiny little needles. And the needles were so tiny, they were 0.1 millimeters to 0.15, but it showed an increased penetration of 340% of lidocaine. That's over 3 times greater penetration of lidocaine going on the skin. And they proved that, tagging the lidocaine and showing it fluorescing under the microscope. So it was an impressive way to get something to penetrate through the skin with tiny, tiny needles. Skin barrier, that's the key. The stratum corneum is the barrier layer, and that's 0.13 millimeters, and that's been proven many times scientifically. You get past 0.13 millimeters, and there's no barrier anymore for things to penetrate. So deeper needles don't work better. They just get you past, anything that gets you past the barrier layer is the key. And here's a study showing the actual depth of the skin of the stratum corneum, and an average 0.13 millimeters. So a 0.25 millimeter needle is well past that. So that's really all you'll need to help things penetrate better, and that's the key. Facial skin is just over 1 millimeter thick. So why would you want to use a needle that's longer, 1 millimeter or longer? You're going to go through the skin into the fat below the skin. So that's, I just think there's no reason to use longer needles, and it's really painful. Here's a study done in Germany in 2008 using needle lengths of 0.15, 0.5, and 1.5. And they found the 0.5 needle was the best for drug delivery purposes. And again, they measured they tagged the molecule and showed the drug present in the skin and penetrate into the skin. And here's when I first started the company. This is a patient I treated. I did 4 treatments with ProCell, and this was treatment of acne scars. And it blew me away how well it worked. So this was my patient that I treated. And that was for acne scars. Another patient I treated back in the day, 10 years ago, 74-year-old woman, incredible results treating wrinkles. So that's when I said, this stuff really works. We're onto something. This is an amazing thing to get the company going. So study came out 2021 that really talked about microchanneling, bi-weekly microchanneling over 12 weeks. They used 0.6 millimeter tips and 1.2 millimeter tips, and they showed the 0.6 worked better. They microchanneled with Rogaine. It was more effective than just Rogaine by itself. So why is that? What do what's the reason why smaller needles are better? Shouldn't bigger channels, deeper channels just help anyway? And I think the reason is because the tissue trauma creates swelling and fluid accumulates right away, and the channels fill up, and then whatever's on the surface doesn't get a chance to really penetrate adequately. So smaller needles get you past the barrier layer, don't cause so much inflammation, the channels stay open longer, and the medications penetrate better. And that's the key, in my mind, to true microchanneling. So Microneedling and hair loss disorders. They 22 studies, over 1,000 patients. Treatment depths range from 0.5 to 2.5. Number of sessions, 3 to 52. Basically, they showed that microneedling alone improved these parameters, but better results was when it was paired with other treatment, either minoxidil or growth factor solutions or PRP. So another study showing that microchanneling, combination treatments work better when you're using a topical medication, not just microneedling by itself. Study done in 2024, last year, 696 studies, twice a week, every 4 weeks. They combine microchanneling with minoxidil, PRP, fibroblast growth factors, oral medications, spironolactone, Propecia, dutasteride, and they basically showed that any combinations work better than monotherapy. So I'm a big fan of multiple therapies, give people multiple treatments with growth factor serums, have them go home and use minoxidil at home, give oral medications if they really want to if they're concerned, you can get prescriptions, then you can use that as well. But combinations always work better than just things by themselves. So a lot of great things for ProCell to look forward to in the future. We see great results with wrinkles, with acne scars, with hair loss. For the past few years, I've been talking about a hyperpigmentation treatment serum coming out, and I keep saying any day, and I'm still saying any day, but it's because it keeps getting better. They keep finding new things that work better than what we had before. And it's hydroquinone free. So this is all natural products that have been shown to work really well for treatment of hyperpigmentation. I finally said enough, this is it. I have something great. I was using it myself just to test it. And now we're making samples to test clinically, and we'll have it on the market hopefully soon. But it will be an amazing treatment for hyperpigmentation because it will be made to combine with microchanneling, and it will enhance its effects dramatically. So hydroquinone has been sorely missed because that's been the gold standard, but this I expect will be as good or significantly better than hydroquinone. And I think it'll be a shot heard around the world as the best treatment out there for treatment of hyperpigmentation. You saw results for acne and rosacea. It's so anti-inflammatory. It's been used for stretch marks. Usually it's an alternating regimen with fractionated lasers and microneedling. So that's a treatment for many different things. I use it for scars, for microchanneling steroid solutions. Instead of injecting the solution, I just use it with the channeling treatment. And there's so many things that can be used for it. It's just a matter of imagination to think about enhancing penetration. So how do you know who to trust? I get this question a lot. So I guess the answer is, do they have financial interests? Well, okay, I'm a part owner of a company right now, so I have a big financial interest. So when you hear that, you kind of scratch your head and say, well, okay, I'll listen carefully then. But carefully. Are the facts being presented shown to be from science-based research? That's why I'm showing you lots of articles written by physicians in major journals that show what I see and what I learn and why I think the treatments that I'm recommending work. Are they from major, widely accepted scientific journals? It's not enough to just say it's in PubMed, because PubMed has all kinds of articles from all kinds of journals, and a lot of them I've never heard of. Some of them you submit an article and they'll listen when you say, please have so-and-so and so-and-so review this article. They understand it. So they have friends reviewing their own articles, which is not kosher in my book. So be careful about what scientific journal it's published in. Are the trials being done on humans, not in lab animals? And watch out for testimonials and anecdotal evidence, because that's how a lot of things are promoted. This is great. I rub it on my skin. I just saw a big thing on someone's website that said they had an injury on their forehead and they put this serum on and things healed so much quicker than normal. I know it's great stuff. Well, okay, that's nice, but show me the double-blinded control studies where no one knew what was really being put on the skin and it made a difference compared to placebo. So there's really ways of looking at things scientifically that are very important. So, whoops, skipped a slide. So, trivia question of the day. What did the Philadelphia Eagles team do after they won the Super Bowl? And I flashed the answer for a second, but the answer is, if you're a Philadelphia Eagles fan, you'll appreciate this. They played the second half. So, best game I've ever seen in my entire life. Anyway, I think we have some time for questions. I'm happy to answer anything that, or try to answer any questions that you may have. And thank you again for joining me today.
Thanks, Dr. Schwartz. There's actually one that just popped up. Tiffany was wondering so we had been asked if microchanneling can be done any time of year and on any skin type. And I had said yes. But someone was wondering about glycation.
In what sense? About what are the concerns
Like
about?
if we could treat glycation with ProCell serums.
Mhm. In terms of any time of the year, is that a
Oh, sorry. No, that's a different question. Glycation just, sorry, by itself. Yeah.
right? So
So if
what type of changes do you see with glycation that you're thinking about treating, for example?
Tiffany, do you want to pop on and talk to Dr. Schwartz? Just wait for her to unmute. If you're talking, Tiffany, you're muted. Oh, the appearance of glycation. So if
Mhm.
ProCell can help with so you know that cross-hatching pattern.
Right.
Um,
Right. So, I mean, it's really hard to just say, okay, is that glycation? I mean, it's all multifactorial. That whole part of the aging process, and we give it lots of different names, for example, and so many things affect it. Everything from your diet to sun damage to just the normal aging and the lack of the stem cells from doing what they can do. So it's all contributory to the same thing. So in a sense, this is a global type of treatment. You're trying to make people look better. The stem cells go in there and try to repair, whatever they can repair. And with all these different growth factors and cytokines, they're sort of fixing up a little bit of everything. And once you start repairing the different collagen bundles, then whatever it is that's causing all the damage is hopefully being reversed as much as possible. So I guess the best answer is yes. I mean, it's kind of fixing everything on multiple levels, regardless of what specific the cause is, if that makes sense.
yes, thank you. Another question. They're just asking if microchanneling can work on acne rosacea, moderate acne rosacea on her cheeks. Her client's looking at microchanneling to improve the skin texture. They've done one session so far. Looks like the redness may have gotten worse. Should she hold off on microchanneling and move forward with chemical peels to clear the acne?
Right. Yeah, that's always kind of an interesting scenario. You have the skin that's very inflamed because acne is an inflammatory process, and some people are very sensitive, especially rosacea patients. They flush easily and their skin gets inflamed very easily. So you do a procedure that creates inflammation, and you would think, gee, I should get this quieted down first before I do something that would cause more inflammation. And if you're using longer needles, then that's a concern because that will trigger inflammation. The flip side is you're using cytokines and growth factors now that are strongly anti-inflammatory. Hopefully that's the case, that you're using the right kinds, like ours. And then just putting the serums on without microchanneling will help to quiet things down by themselves. So it's not a treatment for those conditions, but it helps to reduce inflammation. If you use small needles and go slow, use a 0.25 millimeter needle so you won't create too much inflammation, especially at first when you're kind of going cautiously to watch their acne and make sure you're not making it worse. Then you're doing true microchanneling, letting the anti-inflammatory effect, take over. And then you can get great results treating acne and rosacea with a microchanneling procedure. But you have to go carefully, see how it's working, monitor the results, but not be afraid to use it, because in so many instances, you can see great results like in that before and after picture that I showed. So it's interesting. It does work if you have patients, especially that don't want to go on oral medication and they have severe enough acne that they need something, better than just an over-the-counter type of preparation. I think this is a great thing to offer them that can really turn things around for them. And if they won't take oral medication, then it's a great alternative.
Thank you. Alicia has some questions regarding hair growth. Alicia, go ahead and ask them.
Okay, I finally figured out how to unmute. Sorry.
It's
Okay. So the first question, Laura, I already had spoken to you about, and that was if the epidermis is up to 1.5 millimeters, which you said here in your presentation, then what would the difference be between using the 0.5 millimeters and the 1 millimeter? Because that would break through that skin barrier at only the 0.13 millimeter, right? But it wouldn't go into the depth not only of the existing hair follicle, which is going to be a lot lower, right? So and the one study you did show me, it said that it was done with 0.6 millimeters to 2.5 millimeters, and that therapy was still successful. So what are your thoughts on that?
Right. I'm sorry. Toward the end, I kind of buzzed through some of the slides pretty quickly because I was afraid we were kind of running a little too long, and I didn't want to not leave time for questions and answers or run over. But that study, a couple of those studies were large numbers of people, 500 people plus over 1,000 people. So they looked at multiple studies that just did microneedling treatments for hair loss, either monotherapy or combined with topical medications. So they weren't looking at, well, which level works better than the other. They were just lumping everything together. And they were all over the place in terms of length of needles. So that study wasn't useful for comparing, what length is better. Those studies were useful just to say, yes, if you combine a drug with microneedling and do a microchanneling type of thing, then that's better than just microneedling by itself. But yeah, the long needles, there's no advantage as I was showing with the other slides with that. And I don't know about you, but I'm a wimp when it comes to needles. And when I treat myself with, with different tips, I can't imagine using those longer needle tips. And I have some really strong topical, things to put on to numb the skin. And scalps are really sensitive. So the shorter, the better, in my opinion. And I was so thrilled to see that I didn't have to put myself through pain to treat myself because the short needles work so well. Um, but
Okay.
all
Thank you for that honest answer.
Okay. And I can give you all those references so that when you have the time and they're not flashing by so quickly, you can look at those papers and see exactly what they were measuring and what they did. But when they're group studies like that, they're not isolating specific needle sizes and just doing a controlled study. They're just looking at the past 10 years and how many studies were done doing microneedling with, with topical medications and lumping it all together. So
Right.
the protocols are all over the place. Which is why at the beginning I recommended that protocol that they just did recently in that article, because to me,
every 2 weeks for 6 sessions.
Yeah, that's the one that makes the most sense. And a lot of people say, what do you recommend? And that's what I recommend. And that's why that article was a well-written article and it made a lot of sense.
Okay. I'm not telling on anybody. I'm not tattletaling over here, but I'm taking the advanced skin therapist course with the Canadian Medical Esthetician Board here. And they are teaching that anywhere between the 1 to 1.5 millimeter is actually the best on the scalp. And, so again, I'm not tattling. I'm just trying to decide where I lie and yeah, do as much research as I can with what I'm doing so that I can give my clients the very best therapies. Okay, so that's that.
That article that I cited there just came out, it was just like a year ago in the American Society for Derm Surgery. It's a huge journal. It's one of our biggest journals. And to get published in there, you can't fool around. You got to know your stuff and do the study properly. So I would take that study, print it out, and the other ones in there to talk about depths, and go to whoever is telling you otherwise and say, well, what about this? Why do you recommend using something longer when this clearly shows that's a disadvantage? Tell me why you think this is not true, and have them give you not only a rational answer, but have them give you references that prove what they're saying. And then send them to me because I want to see it as
Yeah,
well.
I'll send them through, Laura. And Laura, if you can send me that slide with that research on it, that would be fantastic. I have one more question.
Let me,
I saw two more people come up. I'm just really super quick about this.
okay,
So,
let me tell you one thing real quickly.
Yeah.
When I was going to shows and staying in my booth, I would switch and take off my ProCell hat and put on my doctor hat and walk around the show. And I would go to other microneedling places, and they were selling tips that had, 2 millimeters, 2.5, and they all pitched me about how deeper is better. And I got to hear the whole deal about why longer is better. And they all had great rational reasons that didn't make any sense, but they're salesmen, and
Yeah.
salesmen sound good, and I wanted to believe them. They made me want to believe them, except I knew scientifically they were, full of hot air. And that's just the way it is. They're trying to say we're better than the other guy, and here's why. So they make stuff up.
Great, absolutely. Okay, another note that you said in regards to the hair growth, you had said that any combination of therapies is going to be of benefit. And so that's when you're talking about the microchanneling with the growth factor serums or the PRP, even if we know the growth factor serums are better. But what are your thoughts on adding, so your topicals, like topical minoxidil or also high frequency hair growth treatment? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, frequency, I would put people through that 6 treatment protocol over 3 months, every 2 weeks or so. I would use the growth factor serums because I think they're the most potent in combination with the microchanneling treatment. I'd have them use the hair serums at home on a daily basis as well. And when do you start throwing in the some of the other topicals? Some people would rather use that instead of our growth factor serums for whatever reason. So rather than not use anything, I think they should use, one or the other. I think they could use it just for long term, just to keep putting it on. You can put one on in the morning and one at nighttime, and then you're getting sort of the best of both worlds in a sense. So Rogaine might be, say, a nighttime treatment, and then in the morning, use the ProCell hair serum, and then you're kind of getting the best of both. Some people buy those little hand stampers and do home treatments, which is an interesting concept that, we've been looking at for a while, and they could use Rogaine themselves, like in between just hand stamping that into their scalp. A lot of interesting things that could be done. But there's no wrong way. I think combinations of things always work better.
By high frequency, I meant the ignited argon gas in the glass tubes that are ignited by electricity going through. That's a high frequency treatment that estheticians quite often use on things like acne or inflammation, those types of things.
I can't comment on. I've never used that treatment.
All right.
My estheticians have never mentioned it or asked me to get one. So I've never looked at that. I'm just not familiar with how that works.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm off now. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Alicia. Does anyone else have any questions that we missed? I hope I didn't miss any in the chat here.
There's 2 in the chat, Laura.
Okay, I don't know that I see them. Do you mind reading them off, Danielle?
Yes, so this one says, how can you get strong topical numbing products if you are an esthetician?
Well, it's called talk therapy, talk aesthesia. You have to talk a good game. You got to smear this stuff on and tell them it's the most amazing thing out there and how well it works, and keep talking them through the whole thing. And then your voice is soothing as much as everything else. Otherwise, you need a prescription. For the stuff that really works is the triple therapy. And that's the best out there, but you need a prescription for it. And there's no way around that. The lidocaine preparations, are the ones you can get without a prescription, and those are just fair. They don't work great, but they help. And the placebo effect for those is huge. So, there's no good answer for you other than, use the strongest lidocaine that you can get that's over the counter, and talk a good game. And if you can get a hold of some of the stuff that's prescription, That's it's phenomenal stuff. It's the best out there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then there's one more question. Would it get better to improve scars with the 0.5 head tip? I'm currently performing 0.25 on clients having rolling acne scars, 4 sessions so far, and we can see 35% of the improvement.
Mhm.
So I
Right.
think what he's asking is it beneficial to go from 0.25 to 0.50 for scarring?
So yeah, my thought is 0.5 is the optimal length for treatment for needles. And if you can't use them, then 0.25 is fine. But there's no reason to go longer than 0.5. But some people, like if you have an apprehensive patient, you can start off with the 0.25. And then once they're comfortable that they really can't feel it, which they can't, then the next treatment you can advance to the 0.5 once they're used to it and they're comfortable. So I think that can get better results. The 0.25 works, but the 0.5 should work better. There are physicians that like longer needles for acne scars because they think it helps to break up the scar tissue. And I used to do a process called subcision, and I would use a needle that has a spade tip, and you put the needle under the scar, coming at it from the side, and sort of move sideways back and forth to sort of create a little pocket under there that would break the adhesions and help a little bit of fluid accumulate to lift the scar up so it wouldn't be as deep. And we would use that really all over the face in lots and lots of places. So I know of physicians that like to use long needles to treat acne scars, thinking that that's a way of breaking up scar tissue to help it work better. The problem is it inhibits the penetration of the serum, so it's a trade-off. And what I found with that patient's pictures that I showed you, I couldn't believe how well it worked, just simply by doing the microneedling or microchanneling by itself. And that was a patient I would have done a lot of the other procedures like subcision. So I don't see a reason to put someone through that much discomfort and trauma to the skin when this works so well.
Okay, perfect. And Laura, do you have any more questions? Oh,
Sorry, I was muted. Um, I don't see any other questions. Anyone is, we'll give it a couple more minutes here in case anybody wants to unmute and ask some. But I would like to mention that if anyone on the call wants to learn anything more about ProCell, specifically microchanneling, we've got a really great webinar also starting in about 45 minutes that you're welcome to attend. Danielle, if you could just maybe post in the chat your email, your phone number, I'll do the same. Reach out to one of us and we'll quickly get you the link for sort of a basics on ProCell and microchanneling webinar. That's fantastic, good knowledge. Other than that, do we have any other questions?
Thanks,
Oh,
Laura. I should mention, now that you mentioned it, is that Carol Desarn is one of our chief educators, and she's giving that talk coming up next. So I highly
yeah.
recommend tuning in for that because that can be very informative.
Thank you. Yes, that is the one. So yeah, Carol does a fantastic job of breaking it down for everybody and answering all of the questions. So if you have not attended one of hers, I highly recommend you do. Like I said, Danielle and I can get you the link. It looks like maybe it's been posted in the chat.
Actually, I apologize. Just go ahead and ignore that. I'm told that link I just posted is actually incorrect. Sorry, I was trying to
Okay.
be helpful.
Oh, no worries, Dan. Okay, well, my email, phone number, Daniela's is in there. Both of us will be happy to help you. We'll get you that link right away. Does anybody have any more questions, though, for Dr. Schwartz while we have him and his vast wealth of knowledge on with us?
I'm like, let's do this again. That's my question. Can we do this again?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. I don't know how Dr. Schwartz would feel about it maybe down the road, but this was fantastic, and we really appreciate him so much and him being here with us.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. And if people can put suggestions together about what they would like to listen to, so we can kind of answer some of those questions and come up with topics to discuss.
That sounds like a fabulous idea. Thank you so much again, Dr. Schwartz and Maria, for hosting. Danielle, of course, for always being here.
Yes,
And
thank you, everybody.
please screenshot, if you don't have a ProCell rep, please screenshot our names and numbers. We'd be happy to help you if you would like any information about us, our treatments, our products, what we can do for you and your clients. Otherwise, I would just like to say thank you so much again, everybody, for being here and your time. We know your time is valuable. And that's it for me.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And thank you, Dr. Schwartz. And again, we'll be reaching out, or you can reach out to us.
Thank you
Great.
so much, everybody. This was such a treat.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
you.
guys.
Bye,
Have
everyone.
a good night.
Bye-bye.